All right, well, thank you everyone for showing up today for the first event of this year's Dismantle Preservation. I'm really excited for the documentary viewing and discussion of Clarissa Uprooted. Clarissa Uprooted is a documentary created in 2020 that was a collaboration between the Center for Teen Empowerment, Clarissa Street Reunion Committee, and Rochester Community Television. It was produced by their youth media team. So we're going to start out with the documentary, and then we are going to move on into a more of a discussion format. You're encouraged to use the chat feature or the Q&A button to throw out your questions as you have them. Just thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this event. Now, be patient with me as I share my screen so that we can get to the documentary viewing. Oop. Sorry, just making sure I'm doing this right.
Dear white man, you should notice that your actions cause destruction. The way you use your white privilege to demolish any sense of black secession. The way you degrade the way I walk with pride by calling me Negro.
Oh, don't forget the piles of lies of where I came from and teaching me that I'm worthless and using my skin color to define the word disgrace. Oh, dear white man, the way you can walk without being fearful, get your way without even saying one word, and do as you please angers me. Yes, white man, you've angered me. You've caused our ancestors to struggle. Us black youth get stuck with poverty, depression, and dejection. Not to mention, before any of this trouble, we had many blessings, many stashes of gold, and a great peace of mind that you stole.
My name is Jalen Wims. I'm 15 and I'm from Rochester, New York. My daily routine is that I wake up, get ready, go to school. It's sort of the same thing every day, just a rinse and repeat.
I'm Amari Anderson. I'm 15 years old. I live in Rochester, New York, and I attend school in the city.
I go to school in Pittsford, which is in the suburbs, and I sort of have to do a code switch when I go there. I have to adjust myself to the new surroundings and new people that I'm not usually around.
To describe Rochester in a word, I would say broken.
One of my biggest fears living in Rochester is not making it to adulthood. There's just not a sense of security around in the community.
One thing I would change about Rochester is people's relationships with each other. That's one of the things we work on in teen empowerment. Last summer, we got a chance to take some notes on Rochester history, and we visited lots of elders in the Clarissa Street community. Clarissa Street was a loving community. They had lots of stores, lots of music. It was predominantly black, but it was a place where everybody could call home.
You really didn't have to go downtown to shop for anything. Everything you needed was in the neighborhood.
We had barbershops and liquor stores and grocery stores and
restaurants. We had cleaners.
There was something called the Pizza. That's where all the jazz music came. Any musician that hit town, that's where they were at.
Clarissa Street is the foundation of Afro Rochester.
This was their Mecca.
Clarissa Street, that was it.
Yeah, kind of hold it.
All right. Hi, I'm Desmani Meeks. I am a youth history ambassador, and me and Terry, we are going to be interviewing you on the history of the Clarissa Street or Court Hill area, and we are making a documentary about it.
My pleasure to meet both of you.
Do you mind telling us your earliest memories about living on Clarissa Street?
Everybody was family. There was no arguing, no fighting, no just helping each other. So if you did something wrong, guess what? By the time you got home, your neighbor already told your dad. You didn't want dad to know, okay? But anyways, but I don't know if that's still around, that kind of environment. Are the people close enough to say, you're like my child?
As a kid, what did you do for fun in the neighborhood?
I used to like to fight.
That place right there looks like a driveway. That was an alley. That lady had big peaches. We would climb on the roof and take the peaches.
I had one Italian neighbor that used to shoot buckshot at us because he had all the good fruit in his yard. And we used to wait till he go to sleep. And we would raid his backyard. And I think he'd be sitting up waiting for us. He'd put rock salt in a shotgun. I kid you not. But he had, oh my God, that man had the fruit.
I also remember a lot of the parties, street dances that we had together, you know? And especially when it came to Easter, well, back then, it was Easter strut. Everybody put on their so-called bonnet and we strutted down Clarissa Street.
Like Sundays, all the ladies with the big hats, after church, they'd walk up to Shep's and they would come from church, take off those big pretty Sunday hats, put them on that table. 2 o'clock in the morning, I was taking some of them home. I drive them home. They didn't have to call a cab or nothing like that. Drive them home. Easter time, the hats got piled up.
As a child, my introduction to our music, R&B. I lived with my grandparents, and LaRue's Tavern was on the right-hand side here. And I'd go up in the attic and I would watch the people come to LaRue's to dance to music. And sometimes they would spill out on the street and I would see them on the street dancing, and they would to Lloyd Price. And I would get so excited just seeing them. And it was a wonderful memory from that time. Like I said, we didn't have to go anywhere. We had everything we needed right here.
What do you notice about our county versus our city? Stay with me here. So what do you notice?
That blacks like to stay in the city.
They just like
It's
it.
not a true fact. It's not a fact. It's an opinion. But
Opinion.
from what I see, I think they like to stay in the city.
Okay.
Forced to stay in the city.
Forced to stay in the city is your inference.
Forced because like they're not able to pay the amount of money to buy houses or stuff that's outside of the city.
Can we all agree though, Rochester is segregated?
Yes, sir.
It was literally designed that way. That's going to be the point of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So during this whole time, like you learned, the Great Migration, millions of African Americans are moving north to cities like Rochester.
My father was from Moultrie, Georgia. My mother was from Barnwell, South Carolina. And they both moved during what we call the Great Migration, when a lot of the minorities, the blacks, moved from the South because the only work they had was working the farms. And after the war, you had a lot of businesses, and they were looking for workers. So that's how my parents came here.
Sometimes they come for part of the year, like Mexican migrant workers might now, and then you go back home. It's kind of what they did, and then eventually people started to stay.
My father come up and in Williamson, New York, and worked on the migrant farm. And the man that he worked for told him the next year, you know, bring your family. And he built cabins for us. It was one of the nicer things in the city because he built his own cabins for the help that he brought up from the South to work his farms.
There's Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1934 signing the Federal Housing Act. And essentially what the Housing Act does is it helps you buy a house. It helps white people buy a house. Written right into the law, it says this: if a neighborhood is to retain stability, be a good neighborhood, it's necessary that the properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. And in order to enforce that segregation, the government made maps of every city in the country. And this is Rochester's map. If you lived in a red area, it meant there were already black people living there where the real estate agents had pushed them to begin with. The green and the blue areas are where white people are allowed to live. Yellow areas, maybe if you're like an Eastern European immigrant or an Italian, that's where you're allowed to live. And you can see that Cornhill, or the 3rd Ward, was 75% people of color at this time. And that was why it got redlined. And if you were a person of color, you couldn't really buy a house in a red line neighborhood, but you could rent there.
I think one of the challenges we faced that the elders had to face is a lack of opportunities to better ourselves within our community.
Not everybody had a lot of money coming out of depression. My mother, like a lot of mothers in the neighborhood, they went to the suburban homes and they cleaned the houses or helped babysit.
You young ladies going to school, going to high school, most of your advisors would advise you to take home ec. Either you're going to be a seamstress, a cook, or clean up. That's all your jobs.
The counselors didn't do a good job of getting us ready for college. We had the military, or you had Kodak, Xerox, Bachelor manufacturing. The one counselor told me he didn't think I was college material. So when I graduated from undergrad, I made a point to go back and see him. And when I graduated with my master's, I went back to see him again because I think that was a disservice to a lot of kids in my generation. And a lot of kids who did go to college from this area went down south to the historical black colleges. Now, my father was upset when I told him I was going to school in South Carolina. He wouldn't speak to me the whole summer because his attitude was, I got you out of Jim Crow and all the segregation to come north to give you opportunities. We got a lot of good colleges here, but I just wanted to get away.
Those at that time who wanted to work for Kodak couldn't do it. Most black people were not able to get good jobs at Kodak, but whatever they had, they were willing to share with somebody who came with a positive, honest approach to them.
Shall we talk about how certain people, certain classes get better jobs within an employer? I do know that I was in human resource. And in human resource, I can tell you who was up front was a pretty little blonde girl. Was Kathy up front? No. But anyways, sure, there was discrimination. Of course there was. But I still continued to do my job the best that I could do it. I moved up the ladder, but I also tried to make sure I kept my grounds. And I'm going to tell you what I did by keeping my grounds. Every time a person came to interview for me, and I know this is going to sound kind of, you did that? Well, yes, I did. Every person that came to me that was black, you hired. You hired. Come work with me. And we did. We worked together and we just burned it up. We did all the jobs. We did them. But if I didn't have that position, I wouldn't have been able to pull the people who I felt needed to have that chance to get in the Kodak and get the same kind of options that I had.
So you said you were a police officer. So how was the police back then? Like, I know it was like a lot of brutality and stuff going on.
Definitely, I will not deny that. I was the first black police officer in the city of Rochester, and you can understand.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool.
So you can understand that going in knowing nothing. When I got appointed, they gave me a club and a gun and said, "You're a policeman." I was called everything but a child of God, and I was called the N-word by the white society, shall I say, here in Rochester. We had good segregation in Rochester. Don't think that Rochester was a nice, pure, nice city. It was not.
The problems grew because the numbers grew, and police didn't know what to do using 1930 tactics. You can't control a situation that has come to maturity. I always give a biological example of if a lady is expecting, carrying a child, when 9 months rolls by, you're going to give up that child or you're going to have a big problem. And so when we went from 2% to 12%, the African American population, and society was not ready to give us equal access to employment opportunities and other elements, there's going to be an explosion.
Do you remember any of the riots that would happen throughout 1960s?
Do I remember? It started on my birthday, July 24th, 1964.
The riots grew out of an incident following a street dance at the corner of Joseph Avenue and Nassau Street just before midnight. A policeman had tried to arrest a man for public intoxication. Negroes claimed a canine dog bit one of them, setting off the explosion.
My husband, my 2 children, and I had gone to Columbus, Ohio to visit his family. They weren't letting any trains stop in Rochester because of the riots. And so we had to stay in Ohio a day or 2 longer, I guess. But when I got back, interestingly enough, the house that the helicopter fell on was the house that I lived in until I was 8 years old.
They took a helicopter from the airport and came over trying to take pictures of the so-called riots. And there was an accident, or whatever you want to call it.
It sounded like a bomb. Back then, they always talked about Russia and we're going to be bombed and this is going to happen. And everybody just panicked because they didn't know what it was. But when those riots hit and they were throwing tear gas, I'm going to tell you, we were scared, but our parents were deathly afraid. My father, who never drove, was coming home. He worked at a press company. He was an artist. And they had a curfew. That curfew said, and I don't remember the exact time, you cannot be on the street. They put my dad in jail. My father was put in jail, put on one of them hard benches until the next morning they let him go. So you know what I mean when I say something like, they don't care. My father was innocently coming home that time of night.
The destruction and stuff. Were you surprised by it anyway?
Don't remember. Honestly, I don't. My mind says I shouldn't have been surprised because there was a lot of anger in the Black community. There was reason for anger. So, but to go to the extremes that they went, I don't know. But you're conscious that it would happen again today. It could happen again today for exactly the same reasons. Why are we reliving the past? It's crazy.
One last question. I have a question for you. Okay? Was it a riot or was it a rebellion?
Rebellion.
Okay, so what is a rebellion? That's my last question for you.
Shan't talk about this. They speak for something right. Well, what they want to get what they want, but they're speaking positive for it.
They tired of getting forced to do something they don't want to do, so they fighting for what they think that needs to
Okay, that's reasonable. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to rebel, or you felt you had to rebel?
And they came together.
Yeah.
All right. How many people feel that they've been in this situation? There are very serious connections between then, 55 years ago, and now. Are there?
Defund the police! No justice, no peace! Defund the police! No justice, no peace! Because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop!
I can remember that they told my father that the highway was going to come through where our house was, and therefore we had to move.
Gentrification is what broke up the neighborhood.
A lot of the people, the older people, just moved out.
They started selling off the houses. They sold them cheap. White people came in, the neighborhood was gone.
In a lot of cultures and a lot of neighborhoods, the parents stay there, the family stays there, and on holidays, 4th of July, cookouts or whatever, you can go back and find that person. You can find their family. Their family was not uprooted. We were just uprooted.
It started out as a street dance, you know. It was just going to be a street dance. And the next thing you know, it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was like, okay. People came from Jamaica, the islands, and California, and from everywhere to attend. It was awesome.
A lot of people think that Clarissa Street Reunion is just another festival, but it's more than that.
For 24 years, the Clarissa Street Reunion has been bringing people back together to celebrate the connections, the music, and the culture of the Black community and of others who were displaced when Interstate 490 cut through people's houses, businesses, and cultural landmarks.
Last year, we decided to create a youth stage at the Clarissa Street Reunion to, in a sense, pass the torch in the memories that the elders have, but it was also to express ourselves.
Youngins like me don't want to keep the old ways, and it's like all the elderly are all stuck in the old days, and everybody's talking about making a change, but it seems to me everybody's afraid of the change. There's too many like me dying from gang banging and gangs. I swear they don't even aim, shoot anybody in range. I swear this world is so crazy it got me going insane. We should appreciate school. Some people can't spell their names. A lot of homeless ones outside, so I hate when it rains. And some of y'all don't get it. Go ahead, call me insane, cause all you do is complain and run away from the change. But not me. I won't sit around and try and wait for the change, cause I can't wait for the change, so I'm out here making the change. Thank you.
What really had a lasting impact on me was realizing the major segregation that you see today is because of policies like redlining and gentrification. All those played a big part in the way Rochester is now.
One thing that we need to learn from the past is that struggle is like a major part in our life.
Society doesn't change without a little force. You have to get the power to force change in our society.
There's an African proverb, and I never can remember it word for word, but as long as the enemy is the one that tells your story, it's not going to come out the way you need it to come out. Look back at that time, know that it was a really great time for us as a people, and see if you maybe can't find a way to bring back some of that togetherness. We need to support each other. We need to be there for each other. We need to understand that we're all in this together.
For our last question,
Yeah.
What is that bird on your neck?
Oh, yeah, this is Sankofa. Go back and fetch it. That's what Sankofa says. Go back and fetch it. Return to the source. Be home. Be involved with who you be.
Now that we gain back a sense that we were overthrown, we will find our way through the vines of courage and break the shackles that should have been broken a long time ago. And we will overcome. Overcome the hurt, overcome the disappointment, overcome the trauma, overcome the oppression, and turn regression into progression.
Wow. I did not watch that in advance because I wanted a genuine reaction to it. And I think I'm going to speak for everyone that was wonderful, cohesive storytelling with great visuals, and seeing the way the interviews would light up both perspectives, like everybody would light up at the engagement. It's really wonderful. So I'm gonna pass the mic over to Jennifer, Shantara, Kathy, and Jaylyn. These are the wonderful people behind the project, and they will help dive into the process and help us all better understand. Again, feel free to utilize the chat feature and the Q&A box because we will want to engage with what you all want to learn about this process.
All right, hey everybody, thanks for tuning in and joining us today. So my name is Shantara. I am the project coordinator for the Youth History Ambassadors Project that created this documentary that you just watched. So something that we love to do in our groups, especially with like young people, is we like to do something called a film storm. And so all a film storm is a brainstorm about a film. So what you're going to do is in the chat, you are going to just list out whatever stood out to you. Some of you have already kind of started doing that. Whatever topics or themes, ideas, things that were said that stood out to you, you're just going to quickly list that into the chat. And then what Miss Kathy and Jaylyn and myself are going to do, we're going to choose maybe 2 or 3 of them. Each of us will choose one, introduce ourselves, and talk about that specific topic. And then we will get into some Q&A. So if you haven't already, you can go right now. Thank you. Yep. So just go in things that stood out to you in the documentary. And I'll give you all a few minutes to do that. And then Miss Kathy and Jaylyn, you will, look at the chat and pick out, one thing to talk about and kind of introduce yourselves and your involvement with the documentary and the work that we've been doing on the Youth History Ambassadors Project. Disturbing, beautiful, powerful oral histories preserved through passionate youth, that gentrification broke up the neighborhood. Rebellion versus riot. I've seen that a couple of times. A sense of community then, and trying to recapture that for today. The generational impact of what occurred on Clarissa Street. The anger, what happened, yes. And not just Clarissa Street, but as it's been said, all over this country in neighborhoods just like Clarissa Street. Heritage and history, multi-generational interviews, intergenerational connections and relationships, long-term impacts of redlining. Segregated, Rochester is segregated by design. I love that one. I am here on behalf of my late father, Renee. J-Ban, if you are watching, if you are there. One of the questions is, how do we repair this now? So you can feel free to continue to put it in. Oh, Charles, oh my gosh, I loved him. Oh my gosh, I loved interacting with him. What happens from here? How do we change it from here? So you can continue to put in the chat. And Jaylyn or Miss Kathy, if you want to kind of pick one of the things that, I know it's a lot, but one of the things that was kind of thrown into the chat, comment on it, and then just kind of introduce yourselves and your involvement in the project.
Hi, I'm Catherine Sprague Dexter. Can you hear me there?
Yes, we hear you.
Wonderful. I wanted to speak on a little bit regarding the segregation in our community. And I wanted to focus on the fact that you have to think back from the beginning of when Rochester was actually formed. And you probably know a lot of this, but we were actually from day one, Blacks in this community were separated. We didn't have a choice. It was, if you heard the word, it has been by design that we were separated. And if you look at today, it's the same thing. And someone also asked that question, How can we repair it? And those are the things that we hopefully will be able to tell you some of the things that we're working on as we go through this documentary today.
Thank you, Miss Kathy. Jalen, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jalen Wins, and one of the things that stood out to me was what was it? Rebellion versus riot. Of course, we've talked about that, and it really just goes back to as simple as being like things in like newspapers about like sort of Black people doing one thing and white people doing one thing, like going to like I guess when riots were happening, like Black people were looting stores while white people were sort of like I forgot the exact words, but you know, Black people are kind of looting and taking things while white people are sort of getting materials because of they're in a bad position in life. And the whole thing with like riots versus rebellion, it goes to show like stuff like that in history, how we're portrayed in our history. It really is different. But as I said, I am a YHA for this project, or a youth history ambassador. And I've been working with them since the summer of 2019.
Thanks, Jalen. And Jalen is also the narrator and the dope beatboxer that you all heard throughout the documentary. And Miss Kathy is one of the elders that has really created an amazing bond between her and the young people who started with this interview, and it has only grown from there. And I think one of the questions, and feel free to continue to ask questions, anything that you would like to speak about. So again, I'm the project coordinator for this particular project, but I am the program director at Teen Empowerment for Rochester, for the Rochester site. And I think when we talk about like, where do we go from here and how do we fix this? Like what Ms. Kathy said, I always feel like we need to call in the individuals individuals and institutions who helped to create these circumstances that were a part of, destroying and uprooting this community, which is what many of the elders stated that they felt like happened. It felt as if they were simply uprooted and removed. And so we're about calling in institutions, bringing them to the table so that they can have a level of accountability, but also to say, okay, how do we rectify what was done? How do we fix that, right? So like ESL, when it comes to, mortgages and loans, when we think about ESL, RIT, which, moved out of the city, out of that area into Henrietta. When we think about that, when we think about the real estate companies and things like that, calling those people in, those institutions in to say, okay, look what happened as a result of decisions and choices that the institution as a whole made, and how we are still dealing with those things, 50 and 60 years later. And we want you to be a part of fixing that, right? Working alongside the people that were impacted by it, but also, you being accountable for it. One of the questions, and Ms. Kathy and Jalen always feel free to jump in, is how did the project start? What was the catalyst, and how did it come together? How did it start?
I'll take that one. It started as we were invited, or the Clarissa St reunion was looking for ways to get the youth more involved with their, with the reunion. And we sort of came along and we put together a youth stage. And, the original was sort of getting kids to like have a peaceful and fun event for everybody. Make sure there's no fights, keep all the drama at home. So eventually, once we had the successful youth stage, we decided to start like archiving and digging deeper into the history of Clarissa, and wanted to sort of make it, make that information accessible to everyone. So it just sort of leveled up from there. We started, like, the idea of the documentary popped up, and then we went from the documentary to the exhibit, and it just newer and newer things. Now we're on virtual reality. We're trying to get that done, and it's crazy.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that it started off as simply trying to get young people to perform at the Clarissa Street Reunion Festival that has been going on since the early 90s. And I think one of the fears there was, and it came out of a fear, it was a fear that what was happening was that young people would show up like sometimes toward the end and they would fight. And so we knew as a youth organization that the way to, quell that would be to incorporate young people in it, to have young people be a part of it, give them a platform to share their voices and their gifts and their talents. And that would quell young people just showing up and not having anything to do, and so on and so forth. So that's what it grew out of. And then we started interviewing our elders. And then all of a sudden we were like, wait a minute, we should probably be documenting this. Like we should probably be recording this whole entire process. And so it has simply grown from there. So now, like Jalen said, we're working on an exhibit to kind of tell the story of what happened to the Third Ward in Clarissa Street. We are trying to bring to life Charles Price's vision that he had before he passed away. This virtual reality aspect of it, taking a look into Clarissa Street, what it used to look like in comparison to what it looks like right now. There is also young people alongside professors and students from RIT working on creating a website for it, and then also curating and digitizing and archiving massive amounts of photos that are sitting in many of our elders' basements or attics, that we don't want to lose that portion of history. So we have also taken on curating and collecting and digitizing photos to help to tell the history of Clarissa Street in the Third Ward so we don't forget it. Any other questions?
Noel asks, what's been this project's reception throughout Rochester?
It's been received very well. There has been a lot of collaboration. We've had U of R come in and talk to our young people about all that they've learned doing this project, and to create websites based on what the young people have done. We've been working with RIT, we've been working with ESL, working with a lot of the elders. There are people who want this to happen in other communities around Rochester. It has really sparked that there's also the 7th Ward where a lot of African-American, Black and Brown people lived and endured, discrimination and extreme levels of poverty. And so they want that history as well told. So it's really been sparking it. We've won awards for this documentary. And so it's been really receptive and it's really been inspiring. We've presented at conferences across the country, and people are really inspired by the work that we're doing in Rochester.
I'd like to add one more comment on that too, because the Rochester board, the real estate board, is also in conjunction with us and working towards ways that we can find to help get more housing for Black people. So that's another plus that we talk about the terminology of call in. We have favorable people that are in our community that are ready to stand by us.
And I think what Kathy said kind of speaks to Marion's question about what are some of the equity outcomes of calling in of institutions.
What makes this project particularly distinct in my mind is this isn't something that was created by your local preservation group, even though they're a great group of folks. It's emerged from what many people wouldn't naturally look toward for preservation or public history work. And that's really amazing. So as our audience, many of them work with their community, maybe more through a traditional preservation lens. How would you suggest that they start engaging, people like Jaylin? How do they start to engage more youth perspectives and utilizing younger audiences to drive the projects? Because it sounds really collaborative and not like necessarily the nonprofit executive director was making all the decisions. It sounds collaborative and like you're respecting all voices as authorities through the process.
I don't know, Jaylin, do you want to kind of speak to that? Like, how do they go about, incorporating and looking to the young folk, and not like adultism, right? Like adults making all of the choices and the decisions about what happens.
I mean, honestly, our meetings were sort of like, the adults just set it up, really. Like, to be honest, the adults just set us up and let us go to work. And, we kind of reached back and forth between us, people like Shan, and even the elders, like those intergenerational relationships. We were all just bouncing back and forth off of each other. And it was just like an open room, open table. Like, it was free. Everyone just kind of got their ideas on the table, and then we all collaboratively just went from there. And yeah, that's honestly like the best way to put it. And then with other things like RCTV and the U of R, like they were just so willing to reach out, and that like just good communication, and we got it done.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I think that one of the things that we realized was when we started to talk about restrictive covenants and redlining and gentrification and what these communities used to look like in Rochester, and that, when we're looking at what we have today, it is a result of decisions that were made, years and years before I was born and before Jaylin was born. Many of the young people were like, whoa, we're not learning any of this in our history classes, right? We're not learning any of this in school. This should be being taught to us, this history that's from Rochester. And I think that's what really sparked our youth. And they wanted to know more. They wanted to know more about what was happening because they didn't know this history. And what they also realized was that a lot of adults don't know this history either. And so they kind of took on this task to tell this story and to retell the story. But the elders really being willing to share their wisdom and knowledge and pass that torch to young people, and to say, like, we're not just gonna, talk at you and, talk about, the way that it used to be, but we want you to work towards changing this. This is not the way it has to be, even though it is the way that it is right now. You can change it. And as Moses Gilbert put in it, things don't change unless you put a little force behind it. And so our young people have that fire and that passion now that they know this history to be a part of creating that change. I think somebody put in the chat, I'm going up, I'm looking at the chat and answering questions at the same time. It seems like the preservation movement is becoming more about cultural history than buildings. If we have sites where there are no buildings, or the buildings are less relevant, how have some people approached that? So the one thing that comes to my mind is the Pithod. We talk about the Pithod all of the time. And that building, of course, it no longer exists. There's nothing there. There is a parking lot. And so there has been a lot of work around creating like a performance space to kind of, memorialize what used to exist in that space. So creating something to remind people that this is a significant space in time and in history. That's the one thing that kind of comes to my mind. And I don't know if Kathy and Jaylin can think of something else.
I think that one of the long-term goals that we have is obviously that we end up having a partnership, even with those that are builders, constructors, and putting new homes in that community again, that are going to be especially for us.
And I think one of the TE models that, help us to really build connections between young people and our elders is that we are extremely interactive. And so, we kind of set it up so that, you know, the elders and the young people are, you know, running around a room together. They are playing tag with each other. They are really building those connections, and it kind of makes everybody more comfortable. So, and we also pay young people. I think that's something that's also significant about and distinctive about this program. We're not asking young people to volunteer their time. We're saying, if you're going to do this work, other people get paid to do this work. We're going to also pay you to do this work as well. We're going to pay you to create change in the communities that you live in. And so those relationships and partnerships with young people become very empowering, because they understand that their voice in the work that they're doing is valued.
How do you raise the funds? Are you funding this through grants, through private donors, a mixture? You know, how does the funding sourcing work for this?
Yes, so we are funded through grants. We do have private donors as well. So we used to be predominantly funded through private donors, but we are more reliant on grants now. But that's how we fundraise. Our young people don't fundraise. They don't spend time doing that. They actually spend time doing the work. And so I think that's something that's important. So we're not saying, oh, go out and do these fundraising activities. No, we're going to work to find the money so that you can do the work in the community. And so then it becomes less of, you know, Shan as the face of teen empowerment, but young people are the face of teen empowerment. That's what it's about, right? And so you should see young people actually doing the work. We handle everything else behind the scenes. Thanks, Sarah. That was a great question.
In the similar vein, Will Prince asks, who or what organization entity has been your most unexpected partner in this program, or your biggest unexpected donor, whatnot?
I had to talk to the executive director. I had to have a little powwow really quickly. But I think I don't know if Jennifer put it publicly, but I think the Historic Preservation Commission has been one of the most surprising partners in doing this work. They've, you know, put a lot of money towards trying to support what we're working on and what we're doing, and through the community foundation. So ESL too. I mean, ESL has been amazing in supporting what we're doing and trying to figure out the best ways that they can contribute to, you know, supporting this project, but also how to fix it and make it better. And, you know, and like Kathy said, the objective is, right, to, build more homes for Black and Brown people, to really dig into, like, how do you fix this community by building a community that you torn down, then raise the prices, and then made it less affordable for other people to live in, to really rectify that part of it.
I'd like to add one more thing also, and that is we're also looking at the Realtor Board has created a Black caucus, because the market in the real estate market, it's very difficult for people of color, but the board, and I say the Realtor Board, is right there working with us to find ways to help us to improve our actual businesses. So that's another plus that's come out of this particular program.
Eileen Tyler's wondering, are you networking with similar groups in other cities, or are you seeing outside entities doing similar work? Maybe where have you looked for inspiration as you've tried to come up with these concepts?
I don't want to do all the talking. So one of the initial groups, it doesn't exist anymore, but there was a group in Boston called My Town, and that group was all about giving the young people the history, and then allowing young people to then go on and teach that history and show that history to other people. And so My Town was the organizer of My Town, the person who created it. She did a whole training with us when we initially started this project and started to look into it. One of our biggest inspirations is what's going on around Tulsa. I think like that is where, you know, we've been following the news and following all the different reports of, you know, what happened in Tulsa, what happened to, you know, Greenwood, that community, and what people have been doing to kind of fix that. When we talk about reparations and we talk about fixing community, like that's where we kind of look to. So we haven't collaborated a ton with a bunch of with other cities, but we know that this is happening around the country. We are definitely aware of that.
We've got a few questions for Jalen. I want to know, like, as a narrator and the person who beatboxed in it, like, where did you have some documentary where you were like, I want to be like X person's voice, or how did you kind of train for that important role in the documentary?
I would say, let's see. I'd say like the recording process, I didn't really, like, I remember when Darian told me like to come in and record a little bit of like B-roll and stuff like that. I didn't realize how involved I was gonna be in the film until like, you know, once they were already like in production and everything was recorded. So honestly, there was no, like, I wasn't nervous or anything. It was really natural. But yeah, I really didn't know like how big of a role I had in all of this until, you know, everything was basically set in stone.
That probably helped out a lot for the nerds.
Yeah.
Noel Stockwell wants to know, what was the biggest challenge for you? Or what has been the challenge as you have gotten into these interviews or exploring what public history or like Rochester's history is to you? Is like the challenge the history itself or the work or what?
I would say it's definitely, it's not the amount of, I guess, resources, because there's plenty of stuff. Like there's plenty of things I've learned. I've learned so much. I would just say it's hard to come across, maybe. Like it's hard. You got to know where to look. You got to look in the right places. You got to be there at the right time, right place. But there's so much information. You just kind of gotta inform yourself or talk to people, get known in your community. But it's definitely just finding the right information and knowing what to do with it. That's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Very true. And this is a question that's kind of for all of you. How, you know, if a community has mostly elders, Marian says, how does one go about collecting these types of stories as a potential outsider? So, you know, are there tips you have as interviewee or interviewer? What would help, you know, what helped you open up, Kathy, in this process to the students? Like, what made you feel the most comfortable to share your stories with them? Are there any tips from either side of the interview process?
I tell you, at first, I really didn't know exactly what was going to take place, but I can tell you this, I was immensely impressed. I was impressed by their professionalism. These are younger folks too, believe me, the professionalism, the type of questions they did ask. It was a very warm and genuine type of interview that we did. And it was both sides. We talked to each other. It wasn't just me talking. We shared information. I shared my pain, and I didn't mind sharing my pain because people don't realize that when you keep seeing this, it already hurts. But then when you see it played again, it hurts, but it makes you feel comfortable when you have such wonderful youth that are at the helm of trying to make this thing better.
Thank you. And another thing is, you know, we really didn't have to try that hard. Elders are really willing to tell their stories. Like, you just come to them and honestly just lay it down. Just tell them what you want and they will be happy to give you more than what you need. Like, they're very open people.
And I'll just add and that how extremely important this is, because I mean, the reality was that we were outsiders, like, as, you know, bringing in young people. We had a connection to a couple of elders, and we, you know, pulled on those elders to connect us to more elders. And They worked really hard to do that, and it hasn't been easy to get, even this year. It hasn't been easy to always find elders and connect them in this technological world that we are living in. But it's so important to do it because two of the elders that we interviewed for this documentary are no longer with us. They are now our ancestors. And so it's so important. Charles Price and Howard Griffin are no longer with us. And so, you imagine, like, we had an opportunity to have young people interact with them and get to know them and to hear their stories before they became our ancestors. And I think that is something that's so important. This type of work is crucial to our community. And so it has to be done.
We're creeping up on our hour mark, and I think Crystal has the best question of them all. How can all of us help promote and support this incredible effort?
I would say definitely spread the word. Spread the word. Share this documentary with people you know. Try to get involved in any way possible. Personally, I took this to my school and took like a lot of the information that I was getting about redlining and turned it into a presentation for Rock to Change. And yeah, just get in your community with this type of information. Anything you learn today, try and spread that. And
And Jalen, how has being a part of this project influenced you as you consider who the heck you may want to be when you grow up? Do you think this may influence your career path in any way, or is it just lessons in history which create mindfulness?
I definitely think in terms of this project and teen empowerment in general, there's definitely it's like opened a door to a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that I wouldn't have considered before, like public speaking and sort of performing and like on stage and stuff like that. It's definitely shown me like a lot of new things. And I mean, being in a documentary and stuff like this looks good on a resume. So stuff like that, it's definitely good and helpful in the long run.
Any final words from Shantara or Kathy?
I just want to reiterate what Teen Empowerment put in the chat, is that you can go to and share clarissauprooted.org. Like we said, we are building it into a full website with community archive. You can also promote the documentary and the exhibit too. The exhibit will be launched in May of 2022. It will be downtown in downtown Rochester at the RIT Art Space. Down at the Liberty Pole. There's also a donation link on the page as well if you want to donate or give to this project so that we can keep doing this type of work.
I'd like to say lastly that I wish everyone who was aboard with us today to keep team empowerment in mind and help us continue to grow strong.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your time and your expertise with us. I'm very, very grateful for that. And I know everybody here probably shares my sentiments that this was incredibly inspiring and a kick in the tush. It was proper motivational. For everyone else who's just tuning in for Dismantle Preservation, we have a few more talks today. At 4:30, we have Jennifer Brennick giving Your Turn on the Saw, and Nedra Deadweiler, she's presenting Preserve Black Space, who is telling your story. And then this evening, we're gonna have a rousing panel discussion called PhDs, Place and Preservation, where we will all learn that maybe those who pursue PhDs don't wanna be academics, so how the heck does that inform their advocacy and their activism? Thank you again for being here today and sharing Clarissa Uprooted with us.